Welcome to Brick by Brick. Join me, Loren Wernette, as I share my personal journey of building a thriving real estate and hard money lending business from the ground up. Along the way, we'll explore the strategies, challenges, and breakthroughs that come with growing wealth. Whether you're a seasoned investor or aspiring entrepreneur, or simply curious about the world of private lending and real estate, this podcast is packed with actionable insights, real-world stories, and mindset tips to help you build your own path to success, brick by brick. Welcome to another episode of Brick by Brick. I'm your host, Loren Wernette. Today we have a very exciting guest. We have Tim Street with us. Tim is a former Marine and currently the owner of Foolproof FSBO. Tim has been in the world of startups and now in real estate with a small portfolio of short-term rentals in Florida. And I'm excited to hear about how Tim got from not going to college to doing startups, being in rooms maybe he shouldn't have been in, all the way to where he is today with his current business. So Tim, thanks for joining us today.
Loren, it's such a pleasure. Thanks for having me. Just thrilled to get a chance to talk to you and get to know you a little bit more. Thanks for having me on.
Awesome. So I gave everybody just a brief overview. I touched on that you were a Marine. I touched on you were some startups. I touched on your current business. Give me an idea of, where you started. You didn't go to college, right? So you left high school, you went into the Marines. Talk me through from joining the Marines to how you left the Marines and kind of what your journey looked like through that.
Yeah, it was kind of crazy. I grew up in Metro Detroit in a small town called Canton, Michigan. I don't think anybody would ever know it if you asked them. And my parents were incredible. I had an incredible upbringing, wonderful family, an amazing sister and mom and dad. It was great. We definitely didn't have college money, and I didn't necessarily have college intentions either. I felt like school was like a prison to me. I was itching to get out. I was really bored with school. So the idea of going to college it didn't appeal to me. And even if it did, we would have had to figure out a different path. I don't know how many banks I would have had to rob to get there. So I didn't go that path. I ended up joining the Marine Corps. God, it was the best thing I've ever done. I only spent 5 years there. Before I had gone in the Marines, I think back to this quite frequently now that I'm getting older and I have 4 amazing daughters and they're all growing up. And I think about where I was during their phase in their life. And I had never really succeeded at anything. I quit pretty much everything I had tried in high school. I was a bench rider for the football team because, me and my friends would rather go out and drink beers and chase girls than show up to practice. It was just a very kind of shiftless childhood that I lived. I really didn't understand the value of discipline, or I didn't really have the self-belief that I could really make anything of myself. So I found myself going to boot camp pretty much knowing that I'll be here for 2 weeks before I fail. And then I'll go back to Detroit and I'll figure something else out. And darn it all, if I didn't just crush it when I got there. It was interesting to be in an environment of not only peers, like, young men who had everything stripped away. There was no clothes that I couldn't afford to buy, or there's no shoes that, I would get made fun of for wearing, whatever. There's none of that. Everybody looks identical. Everybody's like dressed down to absolute nothing. And then you're surrounded by the meanest, scariest individuals you've ever met in your life who do nothing but ask more out of you constantly. It's never enough. More. And ironically, for a quitter like me, for somebody who never believed in himself, it's exactly what I needed. And oddly enough, that experience turned me just into this raving lunatic of success. Like I believed in my heart I was capable of anything. So, I ended up, graduating at the top of my platoon, walking the flag across the parade deck to get picked up at graduation day. It was such a source of pride for my family. It was really, in fact, it was funny. My parents didn't even recognize me when they came to pick me up. They had no idea who I was. And so leaving an environment like that, it changed the trajectory of my life. Boy, that's easy for me to say. And so it changed kind of my path, and it set me on a process where I truly had this. What it did is it lit the entrepreneurial fire in me, because if you look at, the root word of entrepreneur is a French word for risk taker. And if there's anybody out there who can take risks, it's somebody who has self-belief. It has somebody who thinks they can literally do the impossible. And sometimes they do. What I did a lot is I failed a lot in boot camp and, throughout life. And what I learned to take from that, thankfully I was taught that at early ages. That's not a bad thing. I mean, it's not optimal. It's not desirable to fail, but man, you learn so much. You just learn so much more from your failures than your victories. And so I took every like small failure I made and turn it into a learning lesson. And I teach it to my kids today. And I think that made all the difference in the world. So by taking that experience and pointing me towards something as big as, running a company one day, it seems like it set me up perfectly for that. So I found myself after the Marines. I actually worked with the Federal Air Marshals for 5 years, flew the unfriendly skies right after 9/11. And that, I'll tell you, there's nothing as boring to a guy like me as a government job. All the red tape, all the bureaucracy, all the rules, could not handle it. Even though it started off really cool, I felt, you felt like this kind of secret agent guy. It quickly evaporated, and all the shine went off of that. And you're just like, this is just another job. So while I was doing that, I had great friends of mine from back home who were starting these small little tech companies. And I got really interested. And again, completely wild leap of faith that only somebody who was truly not afraid of failing would do is I left that hyper secure, very well paying federal job. And I joined on these guys, and I ran the sales divisions for them. And I built these small little teams. And it's a crazy thing, but we crushed it. I mean, we did really, really well. For somebody like me, never spent a day in business school. I never spent a day pursuing an MBA, anything like that. And it wasn't that I was special. It wasn't that I was necessarily smarter than anybody. I think it's just that I had been made to believe through my experience that I was capable of doing things that I didn't think were possible. And by having that belief in yourself, that made all the difference. And so we grew those companies. As you said, I found myself in rooms where I absolutely didn't belong. And somehow we still won sometimes, not all the time, but there were times where I'm walking out of this room. I'm like, I cannot believe they signed that deal with us. This is incredible. So we rode that wave. And then eventually, after getting tired of living out of a suitcase and wanting to not be a stranger to my kids anymore, I decided I would try to find a gentler path. And those of you who have invested in real estate are going to laugh your butts off at me right now that my perception of an easy life would be a real estate investor, because holy crap, it was difficult. And so I found myself trying to JV in a apartment building. That worked okay. It wasn't a stunning win. I pivoted into short-term rentals. I would do all the research. I would try to find, real nice nuggets here and there, and only to be told that I couldn't personally do this. I'd have to work with a real estate agent. And after 2 or 3 of those guys had just screwed up like the most perfect deals in the world, I said, forget it. Out of frustration, I became a real estate agent because I couldn't stand the real estate agents I was forced to work with. So I took a weekend course. It was over COVID, got my fingerprints taken, and poof, I'm a real estate agent. What a life hack that was. So I was able to acquire my own properties now and negotiate directly with the stakeholders in the deals instead of asking somebody else to negotiate on my behalf. That was such a great life hack. So I found myself owning, I still own my short-term rentals. I love them. There's certainly headaches. I would never, ever have told 2018 Tim that this was an easy way there's nothing passive about the money. But that it's just it's the nature of the game. So with my real estate license, I ended up helping a few people sell with that. And after some, bends in the road around there, I decided to I'm going to give it away. So basically I take all the tools and tactics that I have, and I just help investors, homeowners, young people, whoever it is that are interested in maybe selling their home and not wanting to pay $30,000, $40,000, $50,000 in commissions, how to do another DIY project. Usually the people I'm talking to are very familiar with DIY. They like to get their hands into the process. And so, yeah, that's kind of what I find myself doing today.
It's a lot to dive into. I want to go, there was a shift in your mentality, and I want to go back to that. So you said that when you were in high school, basically you're struggling to finish things. You didn't go to practice, and then you got into the Marines and you thought you'd fail, and you just thrived there. So I want to see if you have a concept of why that environment brought out the best in you, and see if it lines up with my hypothesis.
All right, Loren, this will be fun because I've been thinking about that more and more. Like I said, I think it's an old man thing. As I find myself becoming an old man, I find myself doing a lot more thinking than I used to. So if I had to distill it down, it was that for the first time in my life, I had I had people around me whose sole purpose, their sole job was to expect more out of me and ask more from me than I thought I was physically or mentally capable of giving. And by setting that expectation, it's like the old saying, if you aim for the stars and you miss and you hit the moon, hey, what a beautiful place to be, right? So the one thing that they never did was give up on me. And sure, I could blame my football coaches for not making me a better player. That's 100% my fault. I take full ownership of who I was and who I am today. But the reality was, a football coach has 50 other kids to deal with, and 49 of those kids are trying their heart out to be there. And you get one idiot like me who's there just to get a letter jacket. Okay. So they're not going to waste any time on me. In the Marine Corps, it's different. Those drill instructors, those Marines, they're raising the people who might one day have their back in a fight, who might one day be the difference between them making it home and then on an airplane versus coming home in a flag draped casket. They have a vested interest in the future of the organization that they're trying to propagate. And because of that, I believe that they take it very seriously on who they're letting in the Marine Corps, what caliber of person they're going to allow out into the fleet. The fact is they just will not ever give up on you if you don't give up on them. So that I think that's kind of where that shift took place and how it was able to happen there in that environment versus where it couldn't have happened in a Metro Detroit public school.
Yeah. So I think we're saying a similar thing here, but where I was going to take that is there's a phrase, and I'm sure you know it, steel sharpens steel, right? And so I see this with my children, and I'm going to kind of project here a little bit, but I grew up on a farm family where you had things you had to do. They were required. It was not optional. And if you couldn't do them, you were expected to figure it out on your own. And because of that, I got a job early. I worked really hard growing up. Basically anything I had to come by on my own. And so it made me very hard in moving forward with what I wanted. A lot of kids, specifically mine even, like they're given everything. Like they have a very soft life, right? Soft times make soft men who make hard times, which make hard men. And so if you have a very easy life, and we see this with a lot of very rich folks as well, children have very easy lives. They don't have to work very hard for things. Things are handed to them. It makes them very easy just to quit things and to not move forward with things because they know that someone will be there to save them. They're not held accountable for their actions. And I'm not saying this derogatorily towards you, but when someone is put into a situation where there is no escape, where they are held accountable for their actions, when they are pushed beyond their means, it makes them have to change in order to adapt and overcome. Otherwise, they will fail, right? And so I
100%.
think that some of what you went through there probably had to do with you now were held to a different level. You were held accountable, which you never had been held accountable before, and maybe had to a different extent. But and now it became less about, oh, I don't have to do this because I'll just figure it out. And now it's like, no, I have to do this. I better figure it out, right?
True. And a perfect example of what you just said was, the Marines had mass punishment. If one guy screws up, guess what? You're all paying for it. So there's a giant amount of peer pressure to make sure that you're squared away. Because if you're not squared away, everybody's getting punished for it. And there's nothing worse than having, 80 some teenage young men pissed off at you because you didn't make your bunk the right way.
Yeah.
So you learn, like you said, you learn to do it the right way. And, it's funny because only with the aid of hindsight can I look at how lucky you were to have that childhood because you were taught lessons that I wasn't able to learn until I was 18. And it's not that your parents were mean and mine were nice or mine were mean and yours were nice. It's immaterial. What it was the environment you grew up in teaches you more than any human being ever could. And so my environment there wasn't a lot of expectations about me. It was just don't get arrested, go to school. And that was it. And I look at some of the people I served with, the best people that I had with me were people who grew up on farms because they could figure it out. Like you said, I had a guy who was a mechanic. He could fix anything. He was like MacGyver. If he had a paperclip and a piece of chewing gum, he could get an airplane to run. The guy was incredible because he grew up out in Omaha in a cornfield. And I'll tell you what, if the tractor breaks 75 acres away from the house, you figure out how to limp it home. That's the kind of cool attitude that he grew up with. And yeah, I love hearing that about you. That's really neat.
Yeah. And I think there's also a piece, and part of this maybe for you too, is that at age, right? As we age and as we mature, like there's things that I learned as a child that all of a sudden like, well, I wish I would have figured that out 10 years ago. Right. But like things happen now at 39 that I'm like, oh, okay, well, I can apply this thing that I learned 20 years ago. It just finally clicked in my head. And so, our brains aren't fully formed until we turn 26 or so. And so with age, like I was kind of a dumbass at 18 and 19, like I think most of us are. And it wasn't until I got into my 30s that kind of pulled my head out of my ass. But I think some of that is just maturity too and age.
For sure. For sure.
So, all right. So you leave the Marines. Obviously, you learn a lot about hard work, and you had this strong belief in yourself, which I think is critical, right? If you can't believe in yourself, like the rest of the world is just going to chew you up because no one else is going to believe you unless you believe in yourself. So tell me about these tech startups. Like I'm going to skip over the sitting on airplanes and watching for terrorists overly.
Not
But
exciting.
I want to know about the tech startups. Like what were you guys building? What were you selling? And kind of how did that all end before you moved on to the next thing?
So it's interesting. There's a company in Detroit called Root Level, and Root Level's claim to fame was they were the very first, they built the first website for GM.com, General Motors. And so a friend of a friend is the founder of that company. And, we were talking, and Root Level had since shut its doors after the tech bubble popped and all that. But, he was talking about his next venture. So this is in 2003. Back then, for you young kids who are listening, we didn't do text messaging back in 2003. It was a very novel thing. But what was interesting is around the world they did. They text message like crazy in the UK and Germany, like throughout what is now known as the EU. And the reason was because there was a financial incentive. It was actually less expensive for people to text than talk on their mobile phones. So texting was huge over there. So John, the founder of Root Level, who became a great friend of mine, was in my wedding, John Lauer. He was on a trip over to Europe, and he noticed that. And he thought, well, gosh, it's such a big deal over here. It has to come to the States eventually. So we came home, and he started the first United States-based SMS aggregator. So an SMS aggregator is just a fancy way of saying it had interconnects between the different telephone companies so that, again, this is something that will blow most young people's mind. In the old days, if you were on a Verizon phone, you couldn't text anybody except that had another Verizon phone, T-Mobile to T-Mobile. So John started the first SMS aggregator here in the States, which allowed interconnects. So now T-Mobile could text Sprint and, whatever. Back then there was Nextel. There's all kinds of companies that don't really exist anymore. But so that's the company he started. And we were talking, and one of my initial thoughts was, gosh, this would be amazing for radio. If you could text in your requests, you could text to the DJ, participate in contests and sweepstakes and all that kind of stuff. I learned so much about the radio business, and it was incredible how much that I thought I knew about the radio business wasn't true. It turns out DJs don't want to hear from you. It turns out they've already picked who are going to win the sweepstakes. It turns out like all these things but it was funny because John brought me along to talk to one of the big radio stations there in Detroit. And pretty soon me and the general manager there were just talking one-on-one. And he basically said, hey, let's get all these other guys out of here. Let's just you and I figure this out. And it was such a vote of confidence for me because, there I was, somebody I'd never even set foot inside the technological realm before. I've just only known the Marine Corps and, federal air marshal stuff. So there I was with John, and it went so well that immediately after John was like, hey, dude, why don't you ever thought about doing sales before? Why don't you come on board with me? And I'm like, well, what would it entail? He goes, well, there's no salary, there's no benefits, but it's 100% commission. I'll give you 50% of every deal that comes in. I'm like, oh my God. So I ended up doing it. I ended up saying it just felt right. It felt exciting. It felt like I'm finally in an environment where I don't have this bureaucratic red tape holding me down from growth. So ended up working with John, and we crushed it, man. We did so great. We had Deal or No Deal in the United States coming to us. American Idol was running their traffic through us. And again, this is only relevant probably to you and people our age, because most kids now are like, big deal. We text all the time. Yeah, back then you couldn't. So this was like really cutting edge revolutionary stuff. So we had massive companies calling us, Qualcomm. I think I'm allowed to say this at this point. I think the NDAs are all expired, but we had these companies that were just like, I'm like, yes, I know exactly who you're calling me. Tim Street. Are you sure you're trying to get a hold of me? And it was just really neat. So after that company, that got acquired. And I I stayed on for a little bit longer with the parent company. And again, red tape, the direction, it was suffocating. So I took my exit and left out of there. And then my other great friend of mine growing up, Matt Simmons, we started a small real estate marketing company called Dot Signal. And Dot Signal still exists today, and they provide marketing services for people all across the United States, real estate individuals. That went great, and then again, it got to the point where I felt like I had done as much there as we possibly could. So Matt's still with him today, crushing it. And then I took a right turn and I went into a different direction. So that's kind of where I am today. Those were the tech company wins that I had behind me, and now I'm pretty much just more into property. Although it is kind of fun. It is a fun space to think about right now, especially with all the AI stuff coming out. Tech has always kind of been this beautiful, shiny object to me.
Yeah. The podcast that I listen to just on general is Acquired, which generally focuses on tech stuff. And there's actually a recent episode. Well, it wasn't recent. So I started from the back of the catalog and moved forward. So it was like a 2019 episode. And they were talking about what you were just talking about with texting. And the reason why a lot of those companies were coming to you is because people don't remember, but people had to pay extra for texting plans. That was back when you'd get the advertisement of, or the joke about the dad that sees the bill and his teenage daughter sent 16,000 text messages and he's got a $1,500 bill. People forget all about that. We used to have to pay for that, but it was an interesting time. I was just starting to text at that point. I was like 2004, I graduated high school. And so texting kind of became a big thing, but AIM was always big in high school. It just wasn't our cell towers weren't configured correctly for it. And then when they did get it configured correctly, then it was an additional cost and not everybody was using it. But that's interesting that you were involved in that side of things.
Yeah, it was a wild ride. It's interesting to see what it's become today, but yeah, it's funny. I have those back in my day stories now for my kids.
Yeah. So was that, so I know we talked earlier about like being in rooms that you didn't feel like you should have been in, right? Or didn't deserve to be in. Was that the time of your life when you were in those type of rooms? And tell me about some of those situations.
Yeah. So there was several occasions where that happened. And to qualify it, when I say that rooms we didn't belong in, it's the problem is you're in there with people who are, we were all funded. It was privately funded through John primarily. Like we brought in our own money. There was one small angel, but that was it. These guys are coming in with Series A, and they have giant teams and this shiny. They all flew in on first class and stuff. And here's me flying in on Spirit Airlines that nobody knows about, and we're just shoestringing this thing along. But yeah, so selling into Qualcomm, for example, I know I brought them up before. Qualcomm, I don't think a lot of people understand how massive of a player they were in the mobile space back in the early 2000s. They were incredible, and they actually purchased their SMS server technology from us because they didn't have anything like this. The whole texting revolution took place so fast that there was a lot of major companies that were caught flat-footed, where they were like, "Well, gosh, I guess we should have seen this coming. We didn't see it coming. Yes, we could develop this technology in-house, but it's going to take 1.5 years, 2 years. Until then, we need a Band-Aid." And then what ends up happening is that Band-Aid that they acquire, well, we built it so well that they kind of are just like, why invest the resources to build it? If this works and it's as good as it is, because they're 2 years behind us. Well, we're getting better every single day. We're creating optimizations around our current product every single day. It's going to be darn hard for them to catch up with us. So in a lot of those instances, they ended up we almost became part, they for lack of better words, they might as well have white labeled our server product because they put it on their shelves and ran with it. And it was really interesting. One of the people we continuously come up against, which I found very ironic in the beginning. It was only like 6 months, but for a couple of RFPs, we actually had IBM saying that they were going to get into the space. And the old saying was nobody gets fired for choosing IBM. But in this case, they were so far, like, never mind Qualcomm being a couple of years behind. IBM was even thinking about mobile until probably some bean counter in their C-suite was like, "Hey, this is a growing vertical. We ought to get involved in this." Well, so they send out all their blue suits and they come in and they try to put on the dog and pony show. But, we beat them like tiny little simple wire, Tim Street, John Lauer, a couple of guys in a closet developing this product. We went head to head with those guys. We beat them. And it was just kind of interesting to see how we were shifting gears. And it was kind of right then where I realized, more than ever then, and it's even more so today, this pedigree that people have, it, it means less that you're with IBM today than it does like, hey, I can create an AI model that will optimize your entire business head to toe. And who are you going to go with? I'm going with this new guy. I don't care about what your pedigree is. I don't care that you've had 100 years in the industry. If somebody's coming at me today and they're young, they're agile, they're able to actually pivot and listen to my business demands, that's obviously a huge strength. And I think that exists more today than it has at any point in the past. And I think it's only going to get bigger. I think we're on an exponential growth curve around that new idea taking shape, which is why I was reading a study. I can't remember the exact percentage, but a very small percentage of companies that are on the Fortune 500 exist there 10 years later. It's interesting. There's a ton of turnover there because, and that the turnover is getting higher and harder every year we go forward.
Yeah, I see that too. I think it's super interesting, specifically the pedigree. Just break that down to college, right? So historically, you had to go to college to get a really good job because that was where you could get a lot of information. In 2025, I have more information in my pocket than every other generation before us combined had access to in their entire life. And so the access to information and the ability to put yourself out there to mass amounts of people in a very easy, very affordable way has really leveled the playing field, where I don't have to go get, 2 college degrees and go to Harvard and, work on Wall Street and for, 79 hours a week for 10 years before I can raise a fund, right? I just have to have a good idea, have some knowledge, and be able to, move it forward in a market way.
Yeah. Talking like, so college to me, and I don't like it to seem like I have a bit of a chip on my shoulder because I couldn't go to college, because I don't. In fact, my daughter's there now. She started her freshman year up at UNF. She's going to be a mechanical engineer. College has its place. If you're going to be a doctor, absolutely, college is wonderful, and it's also great for networking. The relationships you make. So if you're not naturally able to speak with people passionately and with kindness and get them to actually see the charisma in you and like you, yeah, dude, college might be where you need to go because it's great for networking. But like as you said, if I'm thinking about it, if my daughter said, "Hey, Dad, I want to start a business and I want to go to college to do it," I would be like, "No, dude, we don't go to college. You start your business. You suck at it for 3 years, and by year 4, you're going to be a rocket ship. Meanwhile, your peer group, it still has to pay for another year, and they haven't even started yet. They haven't even begun to learn what they don't know." So there are certain things, and that's why I love small business. I love entrepreneurship because it gives everybody a fair shot if they're willing to put in the work. One of the phrases that drives me insane that I hear people say is, "Oh, work smarter, not harder." Okay, fine. But what if you're working around already a bunch of smart people? Guess what? You need to work hard too. So the guy who works smart and works hard, he's going to crush everyone else. And so I'm a big believer in just doing the thing that you want to do. I had a cousin of mine, genius photographer. She was incredible. She went off to college because she thought she had to go to college to start. She would have been a photographer you would have heard about by now. That's how good she was. And she spent 4 years of your life and got directed, took it another direction. And I just told her, I was like, dude, start your photography business. Go apprentice with a photographer. You will crush it. And, I would have been right, I think, but that's okay. Everybody has their own path.
Yeah, so I have 2 college degrees, right? So I can't say too much, but I have strong opinions about college because I think too much of our society thinks about college as this rite of passage. Like you
Mhm.
get out of high school and you should just go to college and just get any degree and then you can use that to get a job. And it's not, you got to go to college, and that, like, looking at it as an investment. What am I investing in myself for, and what's the return on investment going to be? So if I want to be a lawyer, or I want to be a dentist, or I want to be a doctor or something like that, yes, go to college and do that. But if your goal is, hey, I want to run sales organizations, you probably should go work at a cold call center, or you should
Yes.
probably go pound on doors, right? Do something
Go
like
sell
that.
solar.
Yeah, go sell solar. Or like, I don't know, I want to run HVAC. Okay, go be an apprentice for an HVAC. There's tons of money in the trades, not just in the working on the day to day. You work on the day to day until you can move up, if you're so inclined, to manage those, to then own an HVAC company that then owns 10 HVAC companies, compile them all together and sell them to a private equity firm and make millions. It's just people aren't thinking about that. And I talk to my kids about all that time, like, oh, we're going to go to college. Like, you can go to college if you want. Like, yes, there is a networking component to that. But can you network other ways? I could join a mastermind. I could pay $20,000 a year and get exposed to people that are interested in exactly the same things interested in, are driven and farther along than I am, and I can learn what they're doing through regular meetups. That's one way to do it. I mean, there's lots of ways to pay money to get exposed to the right people without putting yourself in a random allotment of people on a campus at that time of your life. Now, college was probably the most fun I ever had, so I won't discredit that. But would I be farther along since I have 2 degrees that I don't use at all without going there? Maybe, maybe not. I mean, I wouldn't be in North Carolina probably, and I wouldn't have met my wife if I hadn't gone to college. So there's pros and cons to both. I think you just need to make sure you think about what do I need to my life to look like in 10 years? And does this next step get me closer or further?
Yeah, that's so astute, because I look back on my life and all the ways when I zigged, I could have zagged and didn't zig. And what would life have looked like had I not gone, through several of the things I've gone through? And it is interesting to think about. One thing I will say though is I am somebody who loves learning. As a matter of fact, you brought up mastermind. I've probably spent 6 figures on private coaching and easily. And so I sit there on my high horse and I'll tell people, oh yeah, you don't need college. At the same time, it's not the same thing as you don't need education. It's just important that when I pay for education, I'm paying it from somebody who has credibility, and I'm paying for that education from somebody who actually has something valuable to teach me. I don't need to know what the interior area of a cone is. I don't need to know that there are people who are attracted to people who dress like zebras. I don't care about that stuff. And I feel like, I'm being a little flippant, but a lot of that is taught at college. I don't need to know that. What I need to know is, how do I walk into a room? How do I command attention? How do I get people to listen to what I'm saying, and then know, like, and trust me enough to want to do business with me? That right there, that's a skill you should pay 6 figures for.
Yeah, I would say too that when I was going through high school, I didn't have to work very hard. Like, I got good grades without any real work. And so what college did for me was similar to what the Marines did for you, and that it pushed me to do things that I didn't want to do. Like, oh, I don't want to write this paper. It made me have to learn how to learn, because before it just kind of came innately. And then that ability to learn how to learn led into a desire to continue to learn, which has driven me to have several career shifts throughout my life and gotten me to where I am today. So there is definitely some value on putting yourself in a situation where you are stretched. And sometimes you're putting yourself in those situations like college where you didn't really mean to stretch yourself, but it's good for you in the long run. And you might not have put yourself in that situation if you hadn't decided to make that step.
Yeah, my wife says the same thing. College for her was learning how to learn, because it wasn't just spoon fed you like it was in high school. You had to learn. And my daughter's learning that right now. She's learning how to learn. And what a great skill.
Yeah, and life balance, right? I had a semester where I did terrible because I had too much going on the party side and not enough on the study side, and so had to figure out how to balance that out. And that's a pretty important skill set too, because you get to have a couple kids and you have a business, and you got to figure out how you're going to spend enough time with give everybody everything that they need, or try to, right?
Right. That's right.
All right. So now we got through the private equity side, or the startup side of things. Tell me about kind of what you're doing now. I know that you got your realtor's license, and I know that went really quick. Like, took a weekend course, took the test, right? So, which is ridiculous. So tell me about that, and then tell me about kind of all the things you're doing.
Well, one of the things that I've just naturally taken to in life is, I'm a huge sponge for knowing things. I was like the dwarf on Game of Thrones. I drink and I know things, except I don't drink. I'm like a Tyrion Lannister. I love knowing a little bit about everything, and that's kind of how, like, if you ever look at my podcast playlist or even my Spotify playlist, even the music I listen to is crazy. you think like this is a schizophrenics playlist. This guy's got, but I genuinely can find pleasure in darn near everything I learn about. So that I find to be really important. I know this is a funny way to answer your question, but what got me here was I just I love knowing the intricacies of different paths. So like, for example, I got my pilot's license because I want to learn how to fly. I've been fascinated with aviation. Scuba cert, my sailing license, like, I mean, you name it. If there's a certification if there's a vehicle to operate, forklifts, heavy equipment, like I want to know and I want to be able to qualify. I think that goes back to me watching too much A-Team when I was a little kid. Those guys could run up to anything and operate it. And I still got to work on my helicopter license. But anyway, I got my real estate license. It's not difficult for me to get certifications and things. I could read something once. I don't necessarily have a photographic memory, but I absorb things pretty quick. And so, yeah, I got that just out of frustration, just because I disliked the real estate agents I was exposed to so much that I decided to become one. How backwards is that? So I went out, got my license. So today I find myself teaching people. And the way I got here was I was really crushing it as a licensed real estate agent, helping people sell their own homes. I focused on a listing agent. Again, bought an incredible coaching program, taught me, it basically accelerated my knowledge of that whole space from years to weeks. I mean, it was amazing. And so I took everything I had done previously, and now we're talking negotiating against people who were far, far my senior in terms of, intellect and experience, and still coming out as a winner in some of those negotiations. So I took the shoestring startup mentality of what it takes to be lean and mean and efficient, how important the bottom line is on your P&L. And I took that whole mentality and I applied it to helping people sell their homes. So as a real estate agent, the things I'm most proud of is how well I was able to do for my clients. And so when I was actively doing it, my list to sold price ratio, which is another way of saying what is the derivative of what you're selling for versus what you actually got. So a list to sold price ratio of 9 means on a $100,000 house, you sold it for 90. As a listing agent, my list to sold price ratio was 102.3, which is I was actually getting more than asking price for my clients. And I was usually under contract in the first weekend. And this is in a market where the average time to market was about 81 days. So I was clearly doing something different and better than what the rest of my peer group were doing. And it was funny too, because when I first started doing it, a lot of the people who had been in the space for a while, when I told them my plans, they just kind of laughed at me like, oh, okay, kid, shut up. Well, whatever, you'll figure it out. And I'm like, okay, I guess I will. So I apply all these incredible business practices that I've learned throughout the years into this. And I start it really works well. It works. Liz and I are doing this together and we're enjoying a ton of success with it. And I can tell you the last listing appointment I ever went on, because I'll never forget it. There's a really ugly practice in the real estate industry right now. There's a lot of them, but one of them that I like the least is it's called buying the listing. And what that means is when a real estate agent will show up to your house, and let's just say you have a $500,000 house, and they're going to come in and they're going to say, listen, I'm actually going to get you $600,000, and I'm going to do that because I have this shiny new drone out here that takes aerial photos. I have a 3D camera tour. I have a 12,000 person following on my social media. Now, there are people out there who will believe that. And even if they know it doesn't logically sound accurate, the thought of getting another $100,000 for their house, they're just going to have to, okay, well, I guess let's do that. Well, I'll give you the punchline. The punchline is the house never sells. The guy gets a free billboard in your front yard with his name, face, phone number on it. He's getting sign calls on it all the time. So it's all accruing to his benefit. Meanwhile, this poor homeowner is paying carrying costs. They have opportunity costs that they haven't even thought about. So they're going to lose $10,000 over those 6 months just keeping the show on the road. Then on top of that, the reputation of that address has gone in the toilet, because I don't know about you, Loren, but when I see a house that's been on the market for 3, 4, 5 months and it's still on, what goes through my head is, what's wrong with the house? What did the previous buyers see? They went through the due diligence, the inspections, they found something, and they walked from the deal. Why? What's wrong with the house? So now when that poor seller realizes the scam he's been living under, finally gets back to reality, prices his house at $500,000, no one's going to come. He's going to have to price below what it's worth just to get people to take the chance of stepping over the threshold, because the perception is that there's something wrong with this house. It's one of the ugliest, most horror. I get furious when I see that. And I'll tell you what makes me even more furious, and this is embarrassing to admit. I almost did that. I almost became that guy, which is why that was the last listing I ever took. So I'm on a listing appointment. Really nice guy. He's an engineer, very logical, but he basically gives me the song and dance about the guy who came in to see him just before me. Said, well, the guy says he can get me another 50,000. He showed me he does drone videos. And by the way, just off topic, if anybody here believes that anything other than price is what's going to sell a home, you and I are going to have a talk, because it's all crap. I don't care how nice your pictures are. I don't care if you resurrected Ernest Hemingway to write the listing description, okay, of this house. If you are overpriced, you are going to get ignored in 2025, where people have been conditioned by Amazon over the years to comparison shop. They are not going to give you extra money for your house, even if it's presented beautifully. I'm sorry to burst your bubble. So anyway, this guy ends up going with the other agent. And I don't like to lose. That is one of my big flaws, is I am not a good loser. I get kind of ticked off. And so I'm on my way home, and I literally felt myself make a mental shift and say, listen, if the market rewards us for screwing people over, I can do that better than anybody else. I could screw anybody over. I can do this. And that lasted for about 2 minutes. I decided I was going to go down that path. I go to church. I'm a Christian. I'm not a good man, but I try to be. But I'm broken. I'm failed. And I can tell you right now, one of the things that I'm susceptible to is temptation. I became physically ill when I realized what I had just said. So here I am. I'm a guy who fought up to fight for his country. I have men who died, friends of mine, who are never coming back. They died for me to live a life. I have children who look up to me. And what did I just agree to become for another commission check? It was enough to make me almost want to vomit. It was terrible. And I realized what I had to do. You don't walk away from that, you run from it. I knew that I could not trust myself any longer, because I had come way too close to deciding that, hey, if you can't beat them, join them. And what a dishonor that would have been to the men who are no longer here. What a dishonor it would have been to my parents, my family, if they ever found out what kind of person I was considering becoming. So at that point, I got home. It took a couple of days of figuring out who I really was on the inside. And I told Liz, Liz, my wife, is just wonderful. She's an incredible real estate. Ethical is the day is long. And I trust her with everything, obviously. But I explained to her why I couldn't do this anymore. I just could not participate in that anymore. And she got it. She totally gets it. She supports me fully. I ended up just deciding then and there that was my last listing I was going to take. And so I decided I was going to take all the tools because I was good. It was a shame. I was really good. I got good outcomes for my clients. And I thought, well, what if I just give those away? What if I just let people have my playbook that I used to get above asking, even in a competitive market? And I just let people run with that. How cool would it be, Loren, if I could get a letter from somebody one day and say, hey, because of you, we were able to start a college fund for a kid. And maybe they could go to college where I never could. Or maybe it's people like my parents who are like, hey, we were just able to retire comfortably because now we could contribute that $30,000 that would have gone to a real estate agent and put that in our retirement account. That to me is what moves the needle these days. And so I knew that was like my mission. It was like I'd gotten the message loud and clear from the big man upstairs. And I was like, okay, that's it. I'm devoting my life to this. And so that's what I've done. I've basically put my process in a blueprint that anybody could follow. I just give it away on YouTube. I give it away on my Instagram, on socials. And, for those who need something more structured, I have something like that available for them too. But in the end, I've really stopped kind of pursuing success monetarily. And I've realized that I have a great life. I have a life better than I deserve. And so now it's my turn. I'm at a stage in my life where I can afford to do it. I just want to help people get to where I am.
So that was the precipice for Foolproof FSBO, correct?
It is, yeah. So Foolproof FSBO, and for those of you that aren't really in the industry, FSBO means for sale by owner. It essentially just means you're selling your house without a real estate agent. And a lot of people don't even realize they can do that. There's a lot of money that's spent every year by the industry to convince people that it's a scary thing or it's a money losing proposition, which, by the way, if I'm being, full disclosure here, 90% for sale by owners fail. And actually the ones who succeed, and they think they succeed because they were able to sell their house without a real estate agent, on average, they're selling $55,000 less than an agent assisted sale. So the problem is that's the story that the industry tells, but they stop talking. But there's a sequel to that story. And the second and third order consequences here are that the reason they failed, if you go in and you post-mortem why they failed, They didn't have a blueprint. They had no plan. They watched YouTube. They watched a bunch of Facebook videos. They read some blogs, and they tried to cobble together a strategy. And yes, of course, you're going to fail. Of course, you should expect that you're not going to succeed if that's your path. Imagine giving a kid keys to a car, but you don't send them through driver's ed. You just say, figure it out. You've played Grand Theft Auto. Good luck. And they get out on the road and they crash. Well, of course they're going to crash. So, yeah, that was what preceded all of this is, I now kind of turn a corner, and I'm not really interested in necessarily making money off of listings anymore. What I would really love to see happen is people keep more of their money, send their kids to school, give them opportunities that I didn't necessarily have. And if I could contribute to other families being able to do that, that would just be the greatest gift in the world.
How much of the failure of FSBO do you think is related to not being able to access the MLS?
I would say zero. Let me qualify what I mean by that. Anybody can access the MLS these days. So the big myth out there is that the MLS is gate kept by real estate agents. It's a quasi myth. So the reality is, yes, you need to be a licensed agent to put a listing on the MLS. You have to have a signed listing agreement. All that stuff is true. But there's flat fee MLS plays out there, $100, $300, whatever. They will put you on the MLS and you will get all the exposure that an agent would get. Here's the dangerous part of that. And I've seen a lot of people just say, I'm just going to flat fee list it, and I'll handle any of the questions that come in from there. Well, if that were true, if that were the case, then why in the world would anybody pay a real estate agent? Why would you pay $30,000 in equity when you could get the same end result for a $500 MLS placement? The reality is you can't. Don't get me wrong. That's a huge part of it, is being on the MLS, but there's so much else that goes into it. So how are you going to manage the photos? Which title company or attorney are you going to work with? How are you going to set your price? How are you going to manage the negotiations? What about inspections? What about appraisal gap guarantees? There's so much, I've probably rattled off 8 or 9 things that most people listening to this are going to say, what the hell is he even talking about? And that's my point. It's so easy for us to think that, in this day and age of Instagram, where exposure is necessarily success, that's not how it is in the real estate world. You could be exposure listing all you want. You can put it out in front of as many eyeballs all you want. If you don't have the back end there, if you don't have the blueprint for how to actually execute on this, you might as well be boosting a Facebook ad for something that doesn't exist.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, even I knew about the flat fee MLS, right? But I think there is some value, especially if you get the right realtor. There's connections they have. They know someone that's looking for something, and this is maybe not as relevant when you're selling like a 3-2 in a subdivision that's got 12 other models at the same amount. But you've got something actually, like I'm selling a rental property or a duplex or something like that, then there's value in being connected to the correct networks. But as somebody that's bought and sold and been involved in probably close to a couple hundred transactions at this point, I pretty much know all the little pieces and things that are going to happen during a transaction. But I remember going through my first one. It was terrifying. And honestly, when I sold my first house and bought my first house, sold that, and bought my second house, personal house, before I got in real estate, it was just like this black box. The realtor said, sign here. I just said, sign here, and then moved into my new house. And I don't know what I was signing or why I was signing it, but I was signing it and sending it off just to get it done. So
I've been there. I can personally attest. I failed it. I tried selling on my own back in 2017. I was going through a divorce, and I thought I was going to have to sell the house. Fast forward, thank God I failed, because I still own the house and it produces great revenue for me today as a short-term rental. But at the time, I thought I was going to have to sell the house. And so I was under the impression, I'll just throw it on the MLS. That's it. And it failed miserably, spectacularly. It failed. It did not sell. And only looking back on it can I realize how inept I was to believe that just doing a flat fee was good enough. There's so much more that went into it that I didn't do. Now, if I was doing it over today, hands down, that house would have sold before all the other competitors, no problem, because I know what it takes to drive scarcity around a home, to drive multiple offers. I know how to do that now. Back then, I didn't apply any of the things that I already knew into that. I assumed just exposure was going to get the deal done, and I learned firsthand that was not it, unfortunately. Well, I guess fortunately, if I look back on it, like I said, I'm glad I have the house still.
Right. It's one of those. Maybe it was a good thing. Maybe it wasn't a bad thing from that story, right?
True. So, yeah. And you bring up the idea of networks. The world is getting smaller every day. And There are so many opportunities. If you were an investor and you were looking to sell an apartment building or sell a multifamily or something like that, it's easier than ever now to get plugged into those networks on your own without going through a gatekeeper. Absolutely. There are times, and I'll tell you right now, I'll be the first to admit, there are times when trying to sell on your own would be the dumbest thing you could ever do. And I bring up the example of if there's a legal attachment to the home. Maybe it's in probate. Maybe it's a subject of a judgment. Maybe it's in a divorce proceeding. Give that agent their commission. Walk away from that headache because that is going to be a nightmare of legal hell that you do not want to deal with for any amount of money. Okay. Or there's the occasion where let's just say that it's not worth your time. If you're a cardiologist and you're making that amount in commissions every day you show up to work, why in the heck would you take a week off of work to go manage this? If you're a guy who flips 17 houses a day, are you really going to take a week off of headhunting and paint your walls and fix a no, hire that out. So of course there are limits to who this is for. If I was to think about who really would benefit from this, it's from the investor where every dollar matters. They want to be intimately involved in every aspect of their sale, and they want to get the best ROI they possibly can. For sure. Check this out. If you're a retired couple, the kids have flown the coop, you want to downsize, you have equity in the home, it's maybe got one or two mortgages on it, maybe a HELOC, but no judgments, no liens, and you love DIY projects, 100%. Check this out. But if you're a plumber going through a divorce and you work 19-hour days and you're trying to take over your buddy's dock building business at the same time, yeah, you might want to sit this one out and pass this off to an agent for sure.
Yeah. Focus on your areas of competence. You'll make more money there than trying to do something on your DIY.
Amen.
DIY. I want to make one comment about you. So you made a comment about like everything's getting easier, right?
Yes.
And so the other side of that sword, because that is a double-edged sword, is that the barriers to entry on everything, on most things, are coming down, making it easier for more people to enter those spaces, thus reducing margins. So, for example, 20 years ago, if you wanted to buy an apartment complex, there wasn't LoopNet, and there wasn't all these. You had to go find a broker, right? And brokers were then able to charge more money, whether they did or not, they could have, because they were the access point to those things. Now with LoopNet and whatever else, it's become more democratized, and it basically cuts the margins. And this is how we're seeing more and more things where you lower those barriers to entry, more people flood the market. Law of supply and demand, more supply, then you have lower price.
Yeah, I think now more than ever, authenticity is what matters. And so it's very important, especially in your world, I imagine, where you have to very quickly establish credibility in who you are, what type of person you are. You have to have, there's an old saying that facts tell and stories sell. You have to have kind of like loaded in your 6-shooter in your holster right now, a series of stories that you can tell people where they're going to immediately understand, oh, Loren is a guy who's worthy of my trust. He's worthy of my time. I'm glad I met him. Is somebody who comes in, creates their whole persona with AI. They create a whole backstory that is impossible to have existed. 1 minute of vetting blows them out of the water. I think people are highly suspect these days, as they rightly should be, when they're presented with an expert in anything. Because again, you have more knowledge in your pocket than Socrates, Aristotle, all of the great minds of our humanity could have ever hoped to accrue in a million lifetimes. You have that right here. So what does that do? For good people, it allows them to become better. For bad people, it allows them to become credible and believable. And that's the crappy part I think you're alluding to, is it's very important that you have a mechanism in which you can establish credibility with a group. So like you said, the old days, and that's actually a world I'm happy to compete in. I would very happily tell my story, warts and all of the bad parts, all of the good parts, because it's worth telling. And I can do that unashamedly to a group of people and allow them to form their own opinions, versus, man, it sucks that I have to go kiss this guy's ring just to get access to this group of people. I would much rather be in a world where I just have to be authentic and be real, as opposed to have to kiss butt, in order to get into certain rooms. That's just the way I'm built. And but I'm not a political person, I guess. I'm not really good at the political side of things. I prefer to be around people who are just, they're going to listen to you and they're going to understand that, look, you're not perfect. I'm not perfect. And that's okay to the extent that our imperfections can mesh toward a common good goal. Hey, more power to us, right?
Yeah. Well, I mean, the other side of not kissing butt to get in the right rooms, but you need to figure out how you provide value, right? And
Yes.
so if you want to get into a room that you may have to kiss a butt to get into, you don't do that. You figure out how you can provide a value that no one else can into that room, and then you give it freely without any expectation of return. And after you do that enough times, you become known as the person that is the networker, the power networker, the someone that, oh, I know Loren, he knows this person. And you start
Yes.
connecting these peoples, and now you become this like interconnected piece to all these other people that just giving out value, giving out value. And just through, my favorite saying is rising tide lifts all ships. Everybody else around you is doing great. You're going to do great too. Don't know how, but it will work out.
It is funny, yeah. No idea how, but it somehow works out. But I was a guy named Gino Barbaro coached me when I was buying my apartment buildings. He was a wonderful guy, but he basically called it the three T's: time, talent, or treasure. Those are the three things that you could give, and it's probably something that he might have just stole that from somebody else, but I remember it because he taught me it, and it's true. You can either come contribute your time or what you know, or your money, and that will get you into most rooms.
Yeah, and when I talk to new people about how they can get into real estate, I always talk about, now call it time, talent, treasure, but I'm like, there's three pieces of the deal triangle: the money, the knowledge, and the time, right? And so you only need two of them. So if you have the deal and you have the knowledge and the time, that's two. You just, someone will bring you the money, right? Or if you have the money and the deal, you just need a contractor. So you only need three or two of those three. So
That's right.
we're
Yep.
aligned.
Yep.
So all right. Well, if somebody is interested in finding out more about you, Tim, or finding out about Foolproof FSBO, where can they find you? Or how can they reach out to you?
So a couple of ways. The first thing I would challenge anybody to do is, if you're even thinking about going down this path and you want a brutally honest answer as to whether it's a good idea or not, I have a 2-minute quiz, 7 very strategic questions that I'm going to know right away whether this is a smart move for you to even consider or not. So if you go to foolprooffsbo.com/quiz, that's where you can find the quiz. And actually, Loren, I have an ebook. I'm going to start charging for it here in the next month, but obviously I'm going to offer that to your audience for free. It's if you go to foolprooffsbo.com/ebook, it's basically my 7-day launch plan. So it's a very practical plan that helps an investor, a homeowner, whomever, take their property where they are today and have it market ready in 7 days, where you can start accepting offers on it. So finally, if anybody ever wanted to actually get one-on-one time with me, you can go to my website, foolprooffsbo.com/booking, because I know a lot of times, sometimes selling a home is a private thing. Not everybody is looking at it through investors' eyes. When I look at a piece of property, I look at it as an investor. I very rarely see, my child taking her steps down the hall, things like that. But the reality is even in those circumstances, there are times where investors might have an emotional attachment to what they're looking to sell. They don't want to talk about it on email; it's too impersonal. So I invite those folks to always book a call with me, 15 minutes. We could talk about what your goals are, where you're at, what's stopping you. And at the end of it, the only thing I can provide is clarity. I can't guarantee you that we're going to have a foolproof plan for you. I can't guarantee you that I'm going to be able to have all the answers, but we will have clarity, and I will be able to absolutely contribute to that.
Awesome. Yeah. Probably the first criteria, if you decide, is, do you make 200K a year or not? If you make
Yeah,
200K, you go back to work
fire it
and get
out.
a realtor.
Well, and that's the other thing too. I mean, if it turns out that you are, there is no pass or fail on that quiz. They're both passes, because you're either going to sell on your own, or if it does turn out that this isn't a good path for you, I have a whole network of agents across this country that I've already pre-negotiated discounted commission rates with. If somebody comes to me, and I'll run a quick screen on them, make sure that they're not somebody crazy unreasonable looking for the sun and the moon, I will absolutely refer them to an agent who's already agreed. So they're still going to save tens of thousands of dollars, even if they have to use an agent. If they use one of my networked agents, they're still going to save a ton of money that way as well, and not have to do all that extra work.
Yeah. Just on curiosity, on average, how many hours of work do you think it takes for someone to for sale by owner a home?
So there's several things that go into that, but I'll just give you the quick answer. You can plan on about 20 hours of concentrated effort for 1 week. In my 7-day plan, it's about 20 hours. Now, these are dedicated hours. These are not you checking your phone while you're, tightening a knob on a cabinet. It's 20 hard hours, but the reward is incredible. 20 hours divided by $30,000. I mean, that's cardiologist money right there. I mean, you're doing pretty darn well for yourself. That's a good ROI for 20 hours.
Right. And most realtors are charging 5.5% or something on sales price. Figure for every $100,000, you got about $5,500 of commission that you got to pay. Yeah. And it's interesting because when you actually break down the what they're making per hour, it's darn good money. And as you know, I mean, you can't look at all things that way. Obviously, the guy the neurologist who's doing brain surgery, he's not getting paid by that 1 hour that he's right. Fusing neurons. He's getting paid for all the school, all the things he learned, all that stuff. It's not quite a 1-to-1, but it's a great point to look at. If you wanted to put a dollar value on it, that's a great way to do it. Is your time worth, $600, $700, $800 an hour? Then if it isn't, then this might be a good route for you for sure. And there's more than just the ROI too. Like I know I like to focus on ROI because I am a real estate investor. So that matters kind of the most to me. But there's also a huge benefit from understanding just for the future, what goes into a home sale? How does one position anything to be attractive to the masses? Mm-hmm. How does one negotiate? Going through and understanding what my scripts are, the blueprint that I provide people, it takes you through head to toe. And at the end of that, if you like DIY projects, if you like to kind of dust your hands off at the end of the day and look at what you did, this is a massive undertaking where you're going to do something that 90% of the people failed at doing. And you're going to be able to say, yeah, I did that. That's kind of cool. So there's definitely a huge value to that as well. Yeah. Oh, awesome, Tim. Well, I will make sure that all your links are added to the show notes when I get this posted. I have had a great time talking to you. I think you've provided a wealth of knowledge. And I think our audience will get a lot out of what you say, whether or not they for sale by owner their home or not. I think your story has been very interesting, and I appreciate your time on the show with us today. Oh, shucks. My pleasure, Loren. Thanks for having me on. And thanks, folks, for giving me the time to talk. I appreciate it. It was great meeting you. Awesome. Until next week, that ends Brick by Brick. We will talk to you guys all in the future. Thanks for tuning in to Brick by Brick Wealth Building Conversations. If you enjoyed today's episode, don't forget to subscribe and leave a review. It helps more people find the show. For more tips, resources, and updates on my journey, follow me on Invest with Loren. Let's keep building wealth, one brick at a time. See you next week.